Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the OPA UK satellite event. We're excited to host this today. In addition to all the other OPA activities and presentations that we give, we're adding these international panels. We've had a South America panel and a Norwegian panel. Excuse me. We're trying to add these to the satellite in different languages, different countries, to help support the communities of our OPA satellites. And even though the UK astrology community is established and thriving, as it has been for a long time, not all of you maybe are familiar with OPA's signature programs and approaches. So yes, I am reading this. We have a good study program that we created for beginners, and you can go on our website and check that out, and also check out our website, our magazine, and all our programs that we offer. We offer usually a little over 20 presentations every year on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, usually on the weekends. So check that out. And in April 2021, we will be hosting our second online virtual conference, which I will show you the slide for now. So we're having 14 immersion tracks, 25 presentations for all the participants. The theme is Astrology and the Great Awakening, of course, with the Saturn, Jupiter moving into Aquarius. Creative sessions, sacred dance, yoga every morning, and just a great faculty, a great program. And we're looking forward to doing that very much. The track leaders, let's see here. Wendy Stacy, Ariel Gutman, Maurice Fernandez, Kate Taylor, Gemini Brett, Arlen Wise, Laura Nalbandian, Lynn Bell, Kenneth Miller, Lee Lehman, Julia Simus, Moon Zlotnick, Sandra Lee Sirio, Ann Orderly, and Omari Martin. It's going to be a fantastic event. Check it out. Cheaper than a usual conference because it's online. Go to opaastrology.org to learn more about it. So Tracie, Tracie Storey is our OPA's UK satellite. Thank you for hosting this event, and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Welcome everybody who's watching the webinar live today on Saturday the 24th, and also for those of you who are listening to the recorded version. So welcome to today. Obviously the theme is going to be synastry today, and I'm very excited to be listening to the 4 astrologers that are joining us today. We've got Christeen Skinner, John Wadsworth, Margaret Gray, and Roy Gillett. So I'm just going to go straight into the wonderful introduction for Christeen Skinner, who's going to be talking about Navamsa, the 9th harmonic or marriage chart. So if you're new to the world of harmonics and intrigued about the forces that bring people together, then this talk is for you. Be prepared for an astrological adventure into the tiny corners of the chart and for fascinating insight into the world of partnering. Christeen is the author of The Financial Universe and Exploring the Financial Universe. She taught for the Faculty of Astrological Studies in London and was chair of the Astrological Association of Great Britain and is a trustee of the Urania Trust. She is the holder of the Charles Harvey Award 2019 and is a chair for the advisory board of the National Council for Geocosmic Research. So Christeen has a plethora of fantastic titles there, and I'm very excited to be listening to her talk today. So Christeen, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to put onto the share screen. Are we up and running?
Yes, we can see the...
Okay, all right. Well, actually, hello to start with, but the chart just for a few minutes ago, when I thought we were going to start, actually had Chiron rising, which I thought was absolutely amazing that we were going to be doing relationships today and looking at the inner bones of them. And of course, today in the sky, there's this beautiful trine between Venus and Saturn, which I think is just kind of quite lovely that we've got all that going on. The ninth harmonic, just to give you some key words for this, the idea of this chart is that it will give you some clues as to somebody's propensity for joy and happiness. I think it's also got something to do with idealism, perhaps the quest for perfection. And some people have put forward the idea of there being an inevitability. In other words, when harmonic charts come together in the ninth, there's something perhaps predestined about the relationships. And I'm going to try and show you how that might work. Now, what I'm going to do is just divide my quick 28 minutes up into these headings. I'm going to give you the definition, a few notes to follow, explain the difference between the Navamsha chart and what we know as the ninth harmonic, quick moment on the calculations. Then I'm going to show you an example, just so that we can look at how your own ninth harmonic chart, understanding your own ninth harmonic, helps you understand yourself, because obviously, if you like you, you're in a much better position then for liking someone else and attracting a good relationship. We'll look at a love partnership and also a business partnership. This is the core of my regular day, is looking at business partnerships. And I wouldn't be able to do that without using the ninth harmonic. And I'm going to show you an example of how I've been working with that this week and suggest something also about destiny. So I'm going to suggest that you start by working with your own chart. Use super tight orbs. I don't like anything more than 2 degrees and 30 minutes, but other people are fussier. The tighter the orb between charts, the stronger the connection. Now, if the time of birth is inaccurate, you're making it 9 times so in this chart. So you need to be very careful if you're going to use the angles, and especially, you know, some of the angles for a short ascension, for example, if you've got an ascendant, a Taurus ascendant, and it's very short, if you multiply any error by 9, then obviously that's going to give you very poor results for any harmonic chart. As always, what you're looking for are patterns, and principally you're looking for conjunctions, trines, and oppositions. Now, I put at the top of this slide the ninth harmonic versus the Navamsha chart, and this is because there is a fundamental difference between them. The Navamsha chart, the true Navamsha chart, has been done in Indian astrology, which of course doesn't use the same tropical zodiac that we are using. They're using a sidereal form. So then we're not actually comparing like with like. It's very easy to think of the two things as being the same, but there is a subtle difference between the two. And I would urge you to read anything you can about the Navamsha chart, but also bear in mind that that's really coming from a different arm of astrology. Now, to do the basic calculation, obviously what you're hoping is that you've got a lovely machine and you've got solar fire or Kepler or something else on it that will do it for you. But the basic bones of the calculation are that you're multiplying a planet's position by 9, you're reducing that number to within 360 degrees. And the key here is that for every harmonic chart, you're focusing on number. And the focus also is on the aspects and the patterns. The houses and signs aren't interpreted. So you really are looking for those sharp angles between planets. A quick calculation is supposing you've got a planet at 8 degrees of Taurus. That's the 38th degree of a circle, or 38 degrees from 0 Aries. You'd multiply that by 9, which I hope my maths is right, it would give you 342 degrees, and that would translate back to 12 degrees of Pisces. What the ninth harmonic chart is going to do is it's going to take any aspect in your natal chart where you've got a conjunction or 40 or 80 or 120 or 160 degrees between two planets, and they're then going to become as though they were conjunctions. That's all the calculation bit we need to think about. Let's get into the charts. I want to start off with, I don't know if you know this guy, and the younger ones of you may never have actually seen him, but please, if you didn't, do this on a quick YouTube. Liberace was the most flamboyant of performers. But in order to do what he did, and he could hold an audience absolutely spellbound, he needed really to love himself. That was to be completely at home, creating this amazing persona. And he really was extraordinary. This was the guy who played the piano with all the candelabra, as much glitter as you could possibly imagine. And he was a compelling performer. so that if you were in the audience, you couldn't help but be struck and held in awe by this guy. Now, I'm not going to show you his natal chart because we're short on time for this, but his ninth harmonic chart says everything. And in his ninth harmonic chart, you have, look at this amazing stellium. You've got the Sun, Pluto, and Venus, actually also Sedna and Mars, all in Scorpio. Now, you wouldn't normally consider the Sedna and the Mars with this. We're looking for very tight degrees of orb. But that Sun, Pluto, Venus suggests somebody who is totally and completely grounded and happy to be themselves. He didn't care if other people laughed at all of this. He was just loving every moment of it. Now, the danger, of course, in this is, although it's given, his time of birth is given as 11:15 p.m., as we know, every couple of minutes makes a difference. And as I was explaining earlier, if you start multiplying an error by 9, then you've really got a massive possibility of something that's inaccurate. So although it looks as though his Mercury would be on the IC or opposing the MC, I just wonder, perhaps he was born just maybe 11:14 or 11:13 to make that Mercury exact on the IC. And obviously, if I really wanted to do the work on this, then I would be doing some rectification to check. But as I said, you need to start always with your own chart, looking at your own ninth harmonic, see what you're trying to bring together. The obvious bits are that if you've got two planets that are conjunct in the ninth harmonic, they're friends already, they're ready to work together. If there's an opposition, then you enjoy the struggle of trying to get them to work together. With the trine, there's an ease. You can express yourself easily with those two and enjoy the expression of it. But what we're really here for this afternoon is to talk about relationships. So it's not just the relationship with the self. And I wanted to start with a relationship that we would all be familiar with and that is clearly long-lasting. It's durable. And this is the one between the Queen and Prince Philip. And these are their natal charts. And obviously they're two very different people. If people in the street came to you and said, well, I'm a Taurus and I'm going out with this Gemini, what do you think? You wouldn't necessarily put that pair together. It's only as you grow more into astrology that you can discover that there are many more things to take into account, not just the solar position. If I put their two natal charts together, we can see immediately where the love is between the two. And remember, they were married, forgotten what year it was, I think it was 1947, right? But they've been together a very long time. So his moon is exact on her Neptune, and her Neptune is with the moon. So there's this cross thing between the two. And I think wherever Neptune's involved, you've got potential for durability and understanding. And clearly, a lot of forgiveness is necessary. Well, one has to bend with things. So we can see that there are definite links between the two just from putting the natal charts together. But watch what happens if I now look at their ninth harmonic. Now remember, I'm going to be very, very tight on orbs. I'm going to be very mean about this. And in the Queen's chart, this is her ninth harmonic chart, one of the most striking features is a T-square that has Mercury at the apex, squaring both Saturn and down here over to Vesta. And I would include the asteroids when I'm playing with all of this. So that is the major part of her ninth harmonic. So as we've said, this is where she feels comfortable. So she feels comfortable with a struggle, right? And part of her struggle is Mercury squaring Saturn says, I can't speak freely, right? I've got to be controlled with my thoughts. I've got to be controlled with my expression. Let's now have a look at his chart. He also has a Mars, which is in trine to his Pluto. His is different, right? He can speak passionately. He can enjoy speaking passionately. And if it rubs somebody up, it doesn't too bother him. He can actually laugh at it because that's where the trine comes in. If I put their two charts together, the two ninth harmonics together, the results are absolutely amazing. I'm going to start from the top, if that's okay. His Jupiter at 7 appearing as 7 degrees Aries here, is exactly on top of her Mars at 7. So we've got one, if you think of this as being keys and a lock, there's one exact fit. That's number one. The next one is that in the 9th harmonic, the Mars and the node are exactly with her Mercury. Now remember, her Mercury was part of that T square. So his Mars activating onto her Mercury, in a sense, he speaks for her. And we know that there are many times when he's spoken out of turn. He's been politically incorrect. I don't know how she doesn't laugh at times, but in a way, that's where the two of them have this tremendous bond. He almost speaks for her. I think her time of birth is accurate, and I'm completely comfortable with the idea of his Neptune, 9th harmonically, being on the ascendant. They are completely in love with one another. And I mean, all the books say that it was love at first sight as far as she was concerned. And that's kept them all this time together, because in fact, they can't really divorce. But if the pairing of the two, if we whiz all the way around, we find his Venus lining up with her midheaven. So the bonds between them really are almost indestructible. And my feeling is that whenever you have 2 or more direct connections between 2 9th harmonics, then the two people know how to bring out the best in one another. And yes, at times that can be cruel. There isn't time to explore the negative side of this, but I wanted to enthuse you. I'm hoping I'm going to enthuse you to go in to learn a bit more. And I want to show you in a very direct way how this can be done practically. This is the chart of a client, and I'm calling him the questing client. This is his natal chart. And without going into every corner of it, what I want you to notice is that he has Venus exactly square the ascendant descendant. Now, I've been working with this guy for as long as I can remember. And every single time we have a conversation, it's supposed to be about business, but it always ends up in the amazing story of his love life, right? Because he is bewitched, he's captivated by the idea of being in love, but never actually manages to anchor himself and get into the long-term relationship that he craves. Now, his 9th harmonic shows where the weak link is. And the weak link really is that he talks himself out of the commitment. He has in the 9th harmonic, the connection is Mercury with Chiron. And again, he just doesn't allow himself. He's always looking for where the flaw might be, right? And it's always in the end, the relationships break up because something is said or written by text that just becomes offensive, and then he has to move on. So this is somebody, I mean, I'd like to spend the whole half hour just talking about one. I'm just picking up the very obvious things here. Now, this was the client that I was doing earlier this week. And the question was that this is somebody who he's looking for a mentor. He wants to improve his skill in a particular area. And the question was that he'd found somebody who he thought would be the best person to do this job, but it was going to be very, very expensive. And did I think it was worthwhile doing, and was this the right person for him? And I immediately went to get the 9th harmonics charts out. Now, in the case of my client, this is a correct one because I do have his exact time of birth. In the case of the potential coach or mentor, I don't have a time. I've had to work with midday. So we're going to ignore the angles when we get to them. But what we'll notice here is we're going to look at this Sun Chiron thing. And I'm very familiar with working with this client. He is always trying to improve. That's one of his, that's where he finds joy and happiness. Sun and Chiron, yes, we talk a lot about health matters, that's true, but equally, he's always trying to improve his business sense. The potential coach, and this guy really obviously understands himself very well and knows exactly how to price himself and what he's going to charge for a year's training is, is absolutely considerable. But if we look at this 9th harmonic chart, remember, I haven't got the exact time, right? But just look at this. This was in a most extraordinary day. If you've got a client born on this date, it's one to look out for, February the 10th, 1967, because the 9th harmonic there puts a fabulous grand trine between Jupiter and Pluto and Venus. This is a guy who knows his own worth, is comfortable with his own worth, is completely comfortable at saying, I am worth X £100 per hour. The stress in this is it comes from currency management, the sun in a T-square with Vesta and the node. So my next thing was to try and put these two charts together and see, were they able to bring out the best in one another? The funny thing about this was that the client said, I'm going to ask if he will do a trial thing with me for a month. I'm going to suggest I just pay him for 1 month and see how it goes. Well, that was never going to play with this guy. But when I put the two charts together, look at the extraordinary links between them. The Vesta from the potential coach lines up more or less exactly with that Chiron and the sun. And that really was part of the clinching deal. There's also, although it appears disassociate, but you have to remember that we're dealing here with numbers. We're not thinking houses or signs. Jupiter is exactly with Pluto. And there are many other links going around this as well. The one that I particularly liked was this Uranus with the Mercury and the midheaven. And without telling you what the coaching was on, this was entirely appropriate, absolutely appropriate. And of course, the last thing to look at here is that the potential coach, his sun is exactly on the descendant for this one. This chap here, again, there's not enough time to show you the natal chart. This is somebody sadly no longer with us, but his voice carries on, as they say, across the ages, because this guy was a mentor for postgraduate students in London. And he was a mentor from people who'd come from other continents and who were not familiar with an English way of life. And he eased them. They were PhD graduates. He would introduce them to people, help them with CVs and what have you. In his ninth harmonic, there is this fantastic kite position formation, and the kite here gave him these exceptional abilities. He loved networking. He was absolutely at his best with networking, and I've never known anybody who had the kind of widespread connections. You know, if you wanted an expert in anything, you would go to Nicholas, and he would, if he didn't know somebody, he knew the person who did. This is just an example of one of the people that he was working with, and I just wanted to show you again, this was a long thing. This went on for the better part of 20 years, but of course it would, in that the graduate Saturn was exactly with Nicholas's Venus. And again, when you get that kind of bond between the ninth harmonic, you're going to get something that stands the test of time. The last one I wanted to show you, again, possibly I'm showing my age here, but this is Elizabeth Taylor with Richard Burton. And this is, again, because we're short of time, I'm not doing their natal charts, but putting these together, this is Elizabeth Taylor's harmonic chart. And a bit like Liberace's, if you remember, who had that stellium that we saw at the beginning, this is another one with a phenomenal stellium. But this one is even tighter. This has got, you know, allowing my just 2-degree orb thing here. You've got Uranus, Venus, the node, the sun, and Mercury, right, all coming together here. And this is somebody who clearly was at peace, if you like, when she was playing another role, right? She was, her birthday is a Pisces, so she was really chameleon-like. She could be Cleopatra, she could be anything. So she hooks up with this guy. This is Richard Burton. Now, the time given for him is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't actually know if he was born 10 to 3, 10 past 3. And again, I haven't done the work there. What I do know is that he was born with Neptune and Pluto in the ninth harmonic. They've come together to form part of the conjunction. Now, that would be true of anybody who was born on that day. It's just the tie-in that this brings, and the fact that it's also very close in with this Chiron. I think there must be a midheaven or an ascendant link here that's slightly missing. But there are things that we can note. We can note the fact that Jupiter is in a quincunx with the Chiron here. And I think this, in many ways, he was a tortured soul. We know he drank too much. And I think he, in fact, didn't find happiness unless he lost himself, which, I mean, again, we haven't got time to look at all of those corners, but I think you can get that out of this chart. Now, if I put the two of them together, we start to see why they were so bonded, because they were married to one another more than once. So the bond between them was such that they had to keep crashing back into one another. There was something, destiny, there was something that needed to be fulfilled. And both the Sun and Saturn from his ninth harmonic hold by her descendant. So in some ways, perhaps he was some kind of parenting figure to her, but certainly there was a great, they couldn't release from one another. They were stuck. If somebody's Saturn sits on your ninth harmonic descendant, you aren't going to get unstuck because there's something that you're playing out between you. The other big link here is the very close thing between Vesta and Jupiter. And I think there was a trade going on here. And I think together, and as we've seen with, on the screen, they played beautiful music, if you like, together. Right. So I think, Tracie, I've done it in the time. So I would like to say thank you to OPA for giving me the opportunity. It really was a flash journey through the ninth harmonic, but hopefully enough to infect everybody to go and have a look at theirs and how it might fit in with other people and not just on the romantic level.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was absolutely fascinating, and I could have listened, and I'm sure everyone else, for a much longer. So yeah, you did an incredible, in that short amount of time, it was absolutely fascinating. So we're just going to, if you have got a time, we're just going to open up to a couple of questions. So I'm just going to the chat box. If any of you have any questions, by the way, please put them in the chat box for any of the astrologers, and I will ask them at the end of their talk. So one lady, Sheila, is, how is Christine interpreting Vesta? How do you interpret Vesta?
Okay, just to cut that to the quick, if you actually go to my website, financialuniverse.co.uk, I've written an article about Vesta there. It doesn't actually allow for relationships. I should do a secondary one on that, but it does sort of explain how I find Vesta and how I work with her.
Wonderful, thank you. And then someone else is saying, why the 9th?
I think it's because it's 3 times 3, right? And 3 being the grand trine, and the idea of something that is easy, it's full of joy, and so you've tripled the joy. I would actually argue that you should really go on and have a look at the 27th harmonic, but that might blow your brains out, but actually it's worth doing.
We'll start with the 9th and then we'll upgrade.
We'll move up, yes. Yeah.
Let's work on that first one. That makes a lot of sense. 3 times 3, the magic number. Yeah. Someone said this would be a great solo presentation, so maybe that could be something.
Well, can I just say that we're with the Urania Trust, together with the Astrological Association, we're doing a day on harmonics. Roy, is that November the 14th? I think it is. Yeah. Roy will be able to.
Yeah, it is. Yes. Sorry, I just had to unmute myself, yeah. Christine. November the 14th. It was going to be an amazing get-together in Covent Garden, but unfortunately it's all online. And already we've got about 60 or 70 people booked on it. They're really exciting. It's going very well. You've got the best harmonic experience with David Hamlin and yourself, and some other experts. Mike Harding's coming, yeah.
Yeah, so, and Cochrane. It's a real treat that day. Yeah.
Not to be missed.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
So just book at the astrologicalassociation.com website.
Thank you.
Oh, I think the UT do. Can you book at the UT? Is it all through the AA?
No, it's all through the AA.
Yeah. So astrologicalassociation.com. and you'll be able to book in the events.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm sure we'd all like to hear more about the 9th harmonic, Christine. So thank you for that fascinating introduction there.
Right, well, thank you for asking me. Thank you.
You are most welcome. Okay, so moving on with our exciting lineup of astrologers, we have the wonderful John Wadsworth joining us, who is going to talk about issues of intimacy, particularly connected with the Moon and Mercury, the dynamics between the Moon and Mercury, and how we connect emotionally and build trust, and what it is that we want and what it is that we need. So John's going to explore the inter-aspects between the Moon and Mercury as key indicators of how trust and intimacy can flourish or flounder in relationships. So just a little bit of background information on John. He's a professional consulting astrologer, teacher and author, and is known for his experiential and embodied approach to astrological education. He is a pioneer of astrodrama and astrological theatre. He's founder of the Kairos School of Astrology, where he teaches a 2-year professional training in astrology, and is the author of the best-selling book, Your Zodiac Soul, which I recommend. I have read that and it's fantastic, where he conceives the zodiac as the 12 gateways to wholeness and guides people on an initiatory journey around the wheel. So, John, without further ado, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Tracy. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Very, very grateful to the OPA for the chance to speak as well. Yeah, I think I'll just launch in by also sharing my screen here. So something you asked me when you first asked me what I wanted to talk about, Tracy, was when I said Moon and Mercury. Why Moon and Mercury? A good question. Perhaps not the most obvious thinking of questions of intimacy and trust, but something that I've really been in recent courses I've been running on relationships. I've really been going deep into this connection and thinking about it a lot, and seeing a lot of very interesting correlations in synastry between charts with these interdynamics, and also have some personal experience as well from how significant these are. So yeah, so I mean, just to kind of contextualize it a little bit, I thought I'd just start by talking about Venus and Mars, which we might think of as more obvious dynamics when looking particularly at relating and sexual dynamics. You know, thinking about Venus in terms of how we attract love and sustain pleasure and so on, and then Mars in that kind of, in terms of our libido, in terms of that competitive aspect as well of the lover. And what I see in Venus and Mars is a more mature version of what I'm going to look at with the Moon and Mercury, which I see more as connections in youth. But of course, these are I think these are archetypes that we develop very, you know, that we kind of embody very early in life. And I see the Moon in a way as the kind of the inner child, that impressionable, sensitive aspect of the child, that of course inevitably plays out in our adult relationships. So, and likewise with Mercury, you know, which is that first impulse to communicate when we're young, where language and words first emerge in us at a very early age. That inventive aspect in childhood that then, of course, becomes how we then become conditioned and learn to communicate and articulate what we want, what we need. You know, it's that part of us where we learn to get around our parents early on. And if we're good at it, and if we've got a strong Mercury, if we're very mercurial by nature, then we become very inventive in getting our own way of getting around the adults in our lives, and our guardians and so on, our parents, to be able to get what we want. So this then obviously then plays into relationship when we get older. So a little bit more on the Moon. I think of the Moon as what makes you feel safe and how you get your needs met. You know, so if you think about that, you know, what is it that you, when you're in an intimate relationship, and I'm really focusing on love type relationships, on marriage type relationships here, particularly where intimacy is a major theme. How you care and get cared for, you know, I think that's really coming out of that lunar part, a very, very young part of us, isn't it, that wants to feel safe, wants to feel that we can trust the person, you know, and it is a parental, there's always some kind of parental dynamic going on in relationship. Even though we like to think of ourselves as mature lovers and partners, inevitably the Moon is playing a really important part in the way that we connect and how we connect. And in terms of what nurtures and nourishes us, in terms of you know, how we get, and this is, a lot of this is coming very unconsciously. But when you look at Moon dynamics between people and between charts, you know, I think of it as a much more key signature of whether you're going to, you know, rub along okay, you know, in a close relationship, than the solar dynamics. I mean, you know, having your sun signs in a reasonably compatible order might help, if, you know, in terms of if you're in a relationship with a business partner or something like that, where it's more to do with your path. I'm being very general here, and of course it's also important in relationship when you're planning a future. But how are you when you're, you know, when the lights are down at night, when you're in bed together, when you're close with each other? It's those lunar dynamics which are much more important, you know. And can you be with your partner's moods and their particular rhythms and cycles, you know? So even though you might have, you know, in terms of other dynamics in the chart might be more harmonious. If there are challenges in the moon positions, then that needs a little bit more work and a lot more care, I think. And then likewise with Mercury here, in terms of how we communicate, thinking about how important communication is in relationship, the language, the signs, the gestures that we make. It might not even be what we're saying. It might be the way that our body moves. It might be the way we communicate non-verbally. You know, so much of our communication is non-verbal. How we listen, how we tune in to one another, how we interpret signals that we pick up from a partner, how we negotiate and persuade one another. You know, again, it's that how we cajole, how we convince, all of these things. You know, the stories that we tell about what's going on in a relationship as well. This is, you look at the Mercury position for this. Your quality of intelligence, your wit. You know, so much of the attraction between us is a kind of sapiosexual attraction, where we're attracted to one another's minds, the way that we think, and so on. So these are all really important factors. You know, this idea, I love this quote by Mike Harding: the ancients saw language as magic, quite literally as spelling, that Mercury dazzles and beguiles us, you know, that we're lulled by this conjurer's voice. Even though we think we're in charge of what we say, actually, there's all this language happening around us all the time that we're not aware of. And that we're continually kind of conjuring in mercurial ways our reality into being, and so much of that in relationship and in partnership. And also thinking in terms of intimacy, I was thinking about, you know, obviously Venus is so much a player. We can never overlook the importance of Venus when it comes to intimacy. But I see her as, you know, Venus ruling the skin, about this experience of pleasure, sensation, the sensuality of touch and connection. Whereas the moon, this younger part of us, I mean, I always think of Venus kind of coming in at puberty. She's more prominent in relationship when we hit puberty and we start becoming, it becomes more about pleasure. Whereas the moon is this deep, young part. It seeks comfort and reassurance, familiarity, building trust. Whereas Mercury is the information transmitted through the gesture, which could be through the body, obviously through touch, through the way that we communicate non-verbally as well. But it's Mercury rules the hands and the fingers. So how we actually communicate, even through touch, can be a mercurial thing. So it plays in here too. Just briefly I'm going to show some charts in a moment because I've got some nice case study examples from students. But here, you know, just in terms of the harmonious dynamics, the more challenging aspects, looking at these different ways in which these play out, we would expect with the trine and the sextile, perhaps more sensitivity and understanding depending on the element. If it's the trine as well, you know, I've got a nice example of a water trine to show you. And then just a couple of inter aspects with other planets, just giving Jupiter and Saturn as examples. The Jupiter Moon dynamic, and this of course could be in your own natal chart, having a strong Jupiter Moon aspect, particularly if it's a conjunction or a hard aspect. You probably need more space. You know, you don't want to be too crowded in your you know, you don't want to feel like the other person needs too much of you. But at the same time, in your relation to another, you could be overly nurturing perhaps as well. I mean, with Mercury, you might find that, you know, that your gestures are quite big and expansive, excessive even. That your words might be too much or overwhelm the other person, or you might feel even overwhelmed. You know, in your ways of communicating, many ways of interpreting that. These are just a few ideas, and this may, of course, in the interdynamics also play out. And then with Saturn, a sort of contrary quality in many ways. The moon often needing a lot of control and a lot of stability, and perhaps you know, there's often that feeling of being unworthy, or of needing reassurance because you didn't get that when you were young. You know, the child might feel deprived or something from that, in terms of that reassurance. Whereas Mercury, the Saturn-Mercury interdynamics, again, that's sort of looking at the individual chart. Likewise, with the Saturn-Mercury dynamics, you know, there's a more measured communication, and there may be control dynamics in both of these cases, with Saturn in the interdynamics between control of the intimacy between, you know, both in terms of getting needs met and also in terms of communication. I've got an example of a Saturn-Mercury to show you. So here's a few. I've got three really nice examples to show you, each from students of mine who've kindly shared their experiences with some astrological knowledge as well, because they also have their own understanding of it. So I'm able to share what they've seen, and so they've all got really interesting Moon Mercury placements. In this first case, we've got a female client of mine here with the Moon in Cancer and Mercury in Aries. So just looking at her own chart in itself, we see a square aspect between those two planets, albeit separating. And she says, my Moon squares my Mercury and Saturn, and before I worked out how to communicate my feelings, I feel lost. Interesting, she said put that in the present. So until she's worked it out, she feels lost. As a fire Mercury and a water Moon, it feels like they're completely different worlds. And she says it can be difficult to build a bridge here. But she also acknowledges that her relationships have a very mercurial quality to them, and she seems to attract strong Mercury dynamics in her relationships. Understandable, look, she has Mercury here in the 7th house, very close to her descendant, really astride her descendant. And if we look at this dynamic with her current partner, which she talks about here, you see that there's between her Mercury and his Moon, her Mercury at 10 degrees of Aries, his Moon at 11 degrees Sagittarius, a perfect trine. And we even have the trine the other way as well, between her Moon, 16 Cancer, and slightly wide, but his Mercury at 9 Scorpio. So Mercury Moon trines both ways. And she says that, using her words, my impression is that we can communicate very well about feelings as long as I can find words for them. And then she gives, of course, there's one other very important synastry here, which we see, which is his Saturn conjunct her Mercury. And we can see this more clearly here. This all sits astride her descendant. So his Saturn on her descendant conjunct her Mercury. So what she says about this is that she feels that he can give more precise shape to my ideas. And that's a nice way of putting it. I mean, I'm sure there might also have been some challenges here. You would expect that, but you'd also, you know, I think with the Moon Mercury dynamics being so harmonious, there's a way around this, because of course his Saturn also makes a trine to her Moon in the same way as well. So there's all these harmonious dynamics going on. But I do like that idea that Saturn can give shape to the ideas. Very nice. She also has shared an ex-partner's chart, again identifying the Mercury positions, and here we see their Mercuries are actually exactly square. But we also see some strong connections as well. Their moons are both in the same element, which she identifies in terms of feeling deeply understood, and she gives that as an example. Their suns and moons are exactly opposite, I think, giving a lot of attraction as well. And what the example she gives here is that his Mercury, through his Mercury, was able to crack some really good jokes that kind of challenged her to think differently, and it kind of broke the spell around certain issues between them. So quite a nice example of the Mercury squares there. Here's a second case, and what we see here is a Moon in Cancer trining the partner's Mercury in Pisces. So it's a really exact trine as well. And what she says is communication is a thing. We feel very comfortable and at home with each other. There's communication without words, and it feels very nice. Looking into each other's eyes, or when he wants to show his love, he lets me hear music, or we can be with each other without speaking. What a lovely expression of the water dynamic. And of course, the sun trine the moon as well. I mean, it's a beautiful connection, isn't it? We can see that he's got the exact Sun-Mercury conjunction here. The moon being in her 7th house, meaning that his planet's sitting exactly in her 7th house. So really, you can really see that there's something here that they can really work with. But then she says, only when it comes to practical work, there's this thing. He doesn't speak out what he wants and thinks, I will feel, in inverted commas, what he wants to say. So maybe there's some reliance there with her having a strong moon in Cancer, being the one who feels everything, and that he doesn't necessarily then speak out in some ways. And there are other things we could talk about in that context, of course, as well. With that Mercury in Libra, he's probably also trying to keep the balance and keep the peace. She's the one with the Libra, so maybe she's the one trying to do that. I'm not going to go any further in that because I want to show the third case before we run out of time. So this is a really interesting one. There's so much. I mean, I could do a whole seminar just on these two charts. I mean, the synastry between them is extraordinary. His Sun is exactly on her ascendant. With his Mercury on her ascendant. Their nodal connection is incredibly strong as well. They have very strong dynamics in this area too, Mercury Moon. So what we've got here, first of all, we can see that in her chart, she's got an exact, oh, that's in the wrong place, it should be there, sorry, let's move that across a bit. This is her Saturn square, exactly square her own Mercury at 29 degrees Gemini, 28 degrees Pisces. And if we go to his chart, we see he's got the moon at 28 Pisces, exactly square her Mercury, and of course exactly conjunct her Saturn. What she says about this is that they both experienced their mothers putting huge stress on them over their family finances. And a lot of this is about finance and business. And for him, this was a major signature of emotional tension. But they both absorbed this through their respective childhoods. And when they got together, business was a real key theme for them, really feeling the Saturn-Moon, Saturn-Mercury dynamics here. He said, we took on some kind of emotional understanding that the business was the most important thing we could create together. So I set about supporting him and his emotions and the whole family's emotions in order to nourish our business so that we would never feel financially impoverished again. And she says that in a really interesting way, emotions were a distraction to our overall vision and an area of real discomfort in our expression of them. So she said I would restrain from telling him things if I felt he was too tired from doing what she calls the real business, the real job of the business. So it's almost as if the relationship itself was a business rather than as a. So there was this real distance from emotion. And she said, with hindsight, I was waiting for his retirement to bring more balance to our way of relating. And everything came to a head and sort of. And kind of disintegrated at their Chiron return, and they separated for a while before getting back together again, interestingly, when they are together now. Separating for a while enabled us to understand our difficulty in expressing deep emotions. After counselling, we came back in a much stronger, healthier way with a sense of achievement. Again, that longevity. There's so much here that in the whole chart and the synastry between the charts, what you can see, there's so much about longevity, endurance, and relationship almost as an achievement, very Saturnian. For the work of understanding our emotional connection. He is now better at expressing emotion, and I feel I now have permission to speak. I think it's such a lovely example with Saturn as the pivot, really, between the moon Mercury in these charts. She didn't feel she had permission to speak, classic Saturn-Mercury dynamic. He didn't feel he could express his emotions. And it seems as though Saturn, as the one who makes you wait, I always think Saturn is about, Saturn doesn't necessarily stop you, but it makes you wait. So this idea that, you know, through the longevity, and they've been together for a very long time, they've, you know, found this permission has arrived for his emotion and for her communication. So yeah, I think I managed to get that in the time.
Yeah, that was good timing there, John.
Great. So I'll yeah, I mean, I'll just say a little bit. I mean, if you're interested in any of my work, I offer consultations, classes, and professional trainings, and give various talks to various events and so on. So please get in touch, and I'm very happy to answer any questions if we've got time, Tracie.
Yeah, we have a few minutes of time. Thank you, John. That was fascinating. I think it's the same with Christine. It's just starting to open up the doorway to these interesting perspectives on synastry. So thank you for opening up the door to that. We're going to open up the floor to questions. So anyone, please put your questions forward in the chat box. One of the questions, John, is about have you found harmonious unions in some of, when you've looked at synastry within charts of partners where there is conflict, you know, disharmonious aspects? Do you still find?
Definitely. Yeah, I think it is possible. But I think it just takes more. It takes an understanding. I think both parties then need to really be prepared to, because what can happen, I think there can be a lot of projection, especially when you've got, you know, strong oppositional square aspects in a chart, hard aspects in a chart. There can be a lot of projection, and there can be particularly with the moon, there can be a lot of defensiveness to try and protect your position, because you feel energetically that the other person is coming from a different perspective that seems to oppose your own. But you know, I've worked with couples over the years with really challenging aspects, and seen amazing breakthroughs in transformation, and you know, that ability that we have to be able to step into the shoes of another. Relationship is it's a burning ground of the soul, isn't it, in so many ways? And you know, I think we're often most attracted to partners who have challenging factors. I've seen it more often than not in many cases, in many relationships. Maybe that's because they're coming to see me because they've got issues going on, of course. But you know, I think there's that possibility, and you know, I'm a great believer in the possibility of transformation, that we can work with our hard aspects. So I never want to dismiss a relationship because, let's say, the moon's a square or the Mercury's a square, because there are often also a lot of compensating factors that you can draw on, lots of strong places that you can find connection, and you can work around things as well.
Would you say your astrodrama work helps with the transformation that you can work with within these challenging aspects? Yeah,
because typically when we do astrodrama work, we're always working with the hard aspects, because they're the ones usually that the person's bringing. You know, if somebody's bringing their issues to be able to work that out, often it's the hard aspects that we work with. So yeah, definitely. I really think that's, you know, you might think of them as karmic signatures, you know, that we've come into particular dynamics with people in our lives to work those out. But I do think that Mercury is overlooked in relationship as a factor. I mean, it's something as an astrologer as well. I always pay attention to the Mercury position of the client, because, you know, I have my own style of communication through my own Mercury, but my client's going to come with a different one. And I need to be in their world. I need to be able to communicate in such a way that they're going to understand and interpret that in a way that's useful for them. So I think equally in relationship, you know, how are our Mercuries aligned, and how are they aligned to the moon? So how do we help to communicate and build trust and reassurance for the other person?
Fascinating. Yes. Great. What is the source of your fascinating pictures of astro concepts?
I've been collecting a lot of photos, a lot of pictures over the years. I mean, I use a piece of software called Canva to create presentations, and they have huge data banks of free images that you can use that are copyright free. But,
I was thinking
yeah.
about one of the moon, John. It was so clever, the way that the picture you had of the moon. I wonder if that was original art or something you got from somewhere else.
I got it from, I think I've got that from, again, free sources of oh, do you mean the one on the left with the moon? Yeah, that's the one I actually had commissioned years ago. I had a set of planetary images commissioned by an artist in Brighton.
Very intelligent and sensitive.
To do a sense, good. Yeah, they're really beautiful, yeah, and all of them, they're amazing.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the movement aspect of your astrodrama work, because I think movement is very important with regards to shifting energies. But I don't think there's many people doing this astrodrama work that you do in regards to, would you say it's a little bit like family constellations?
It's a little bit like that, but it comes directly out of Roberto Moreno's psychodrama. So I sort of follow more that line and developed it in my own way. But I find that there's something about the distancing that happens when you go into the planetary, when you start embodying the planetary theme rather than the family theme, that I think opens up and expands the possibility for something other to enter the space. You know, I mean, as a facilitator of astrodrama, my role is always to remove myself as soon as possible from needing to exert any control over what happens, and to allow, which is why I spend quite a lot of time preparing the space and getting, I use mask and costume and everything to help people get in to roll. But then, you know, you're actually allowing something else to come through. And I mean, I have that, in all of my astrological work, I always sense that, you know, that we're opening up to something. We're looking at symbols on a piece of paper, but actually, I always like to think that we're in the realm of the archetypes, or dare I say, the gods. You know, and that we shouldn't be exerting too much interpretive control over them, because we also need to allow them to speak, and astrodrama allows that. Yeah, and that's what I love about it. And even in consultation work, I try not to overinterpret a chart, because all sorts of magic can happen in a space, in a live session, where synchronicity, meaning can emerge. Yeah, sounds a strange thing to say, not to overinterpret a chart, but I have learned over the years that that things will happen that are beyond even my ability in that moment to interpret.
Thank you, John. That's giving it over to the planets, giving it over to the gods, exactly. And seeing what comes through. Fascinating work. Thank you so much. That's a great presentation. And yeah, if anyone has any more questions for John, you saw his contact information there, or if anyone needs anything more, I can put it in the chat box. So thank you, John. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Yeah.
And so moving swiftly on, we're keeping good time here. We will be moving on to the lovely Margaret Gray, who is joining us from Ireland. And today, Margaret is going to be speaking about the compatibility of your relationship, exploring the synastry between you and your key relationships, specifically the midpoint composite chart, which describes the purpose and inner dynamics of the relationship itself. But what about the relationship between your chart and the composite chart? How do you affect and influence the relationship, and how does it impact you? So Margaret is joining us from Dublin in Ireland, and she is an international consulting and teaching astrologer based in Ireland. She's also a psychotherapist and co-founder of Relationships and Astrology, as well as a co-organizer of Astrology Ireland. So Margaret, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tracie. It's so lovely to be here. And I'm just going to go right ahead and share my screen. Let me get this up. Okay, and oops, let's have a look. Let's start this from the beginning. Okay, is that up and running? Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes, we can see.
When I've talked about this topic before, I've called it, I love the person, but the relationship is a struggle. Because one of the questions that really comes up a lot when I'm working with couples, either psychotherapy or astrology, is that, you know, we met, we were happy, and then what happened? It's like, you know, I love this person, but somehow the relationship is really challenging. And we often talk about the compatibility between two people, but we forget that the relationship itself is a third entity that we interact with, and also that the relationship itself interacts with us. And it affects us. It's basically like a permanent transit. So today the focus is on couple relationships, but we're also going to talk about general relationships. Because of course, and particularly in this time of COVID, this felt like a very relevant talk in terms of that many people have found themselves living, co-living with people that maybe they didn't expect to spend so much time together, maybe roommates and friends or family. And so it's really important to have some tools available to look at how can we manage these relationships. I put this image up because we all know that many relationships start off very blissful. You know, we're in love, we're happy, there's the dream, the fantasy, this is the person. We think this is it, our search for love is over. And then this is what happens after a while, and we wonder what on earth happened here. One thing to keep in mind is that we always assume, or we often assume, that our relationships, particularly our intimate relationships, are private. And so what happens to us in those relationships doesn't affect other people. But actually, relationships really affect everyone, whatever is going on, because it taps into that archetype of the lover within us all. And it taps into both the resolved issues within us and the unresolved issues. And if we keep in mind that almost 2 billion people watch this royal wedding, and of course, not all of them are royalists, it's not really to do with that. It's something more about our hope of redemption through love, you know. So whatever happens in our relationships, that's also, you know, just to keep in mind that it's very important that it really does impact everyone else. Now, there are a lot of things that astrology can't tell us about love. It can't always tell us, you know, is there going to be a sexual chemistry between two people? You know, we've all been in situations where we, as astrologers, we look at charts, we think they're really compatible. We introduce those friends to each other and they meet each other and there isn't, you know, any spark whatsoever there. But there are a lot of things that we can help people with. And the starting point always is the individual chart, regardless of what we're doing in relationships. So what we're looking at in the individual chart are the strengths and resources for each person. And also, of course, we're looking at the vulnerabilities that can be triggered for individuals. The next step is the synastry, which of course is the instant connection between people. It describes really that energetic connection. And we all know it, you know, even, you know, when we meet, when somebody, say we're at a party or something, we feel drawn to certain people, we feel repulsed by other people. That's really when, if we were to look at those charts, we would see the synastry. And that happens very quickly. It's like an instant thing. And it's a little bit for, you know, for those of us who are a little bit kind of on with the years, we remember these negatives, you know, way before digital photography. And if you imagine putting one negative on top of the other, that's really what synastry is about. Now, the third step, which is part, you know, the important part of what we're looking at today, is the composite chart. And we're going to be looking at the synastry of the individual chart with the composite. So just to revise very quickly what a midpoint composite is, and I do use the midpoint composite. I know some people use the Davison chart. If that works for you, wonderful, whatever works best. It's literally the midpoint position. And if you look at it in terms of visually, it's, you know, two different ingredients which, when they're mixed together, create a third entity. And this is very important because when we're working as relationship astrologers, we're really working with the two individuals, the dynamics between them, and this third entity, which is the composite chart. The composite, as we know, doesn't come into effect immediately. It always takes a little bit of time to develop, or at least to become aware of it, whereas the synastry is absolutely immediate. We have an immediate reaction. So that's why we don't always know what's going on really with the composite chart until we kind of spend a little bit of time with somebody. And so this is really what it looks like. There's the dynamics between the two people, and then each of their dynamics with each other. Not to mention that, of course, for each individual, we are also carrying our ancestors. We're carrying, you know, the internalized images of the people that have gone before us. So, you know, I always say in a relationship, there's a lot more people in the room than the two individuals, you know, in front of us. So when we're looking at the synastry of the individual chart, the composite chart, we're really considering how each individual experiences the relationship itself. The other thing we're considering is how each individual influences the relationship. And keep in mind, if we think about things like epigenetics, we are affected by that which in turn affects us. And that's something very important to keep in mind. It's not a one-way street. The other thing is that we're looking at the compatibility between the individual and the relationship. Now, of course, all of this is also affected by the transits each individual is going through, the developmental stage of life they're going through, the progressions in their chart. So there are lots of layers upon layers upon layers of what's actually happening within a relationship dynamic. Now, when we're looking at the comparison of the individual to the composite chart, the first thing I always look at is the elemental balance. To me, that's so fundamental. We look at that in synastry between individuals, but also we look at it in synastry between the individual and the composite chart. Does the elemental balance change for one person or the other? And we'll look at a second at an example. How does the house emphasis change? And also always compare the placements of the sun and the moon. Now, John just spoke to us how important the moon is, particularly in relationships, and Mercury, absolutely. But also, you know, the sun also plays a part in this. Because if we're looking at particularly the sun in the composite chart, we're talking about what is the sole purpose of the relationship. Soul is in S-O-U-L. What are we looking for in the synastry? So we're looking at aspects to and from the composite sun and nodes, which are really describing the purpose, why these people are together. We're looking at aspects to and from the composite moon and the personal planets. We're looking at, of course, the moon, as John talked about, how each individual relates to the emotional expression of the relationship itself. Is it similar? Is it different? Is the element of the moon similar to the individual's, or is it very different? So, for example, one individual's moon could be in water or earth, and the other person's moon could be in air and fire. And then the composite moon may be a totally different element to each of them. So that can be a little bit challenging, because suddenly the people find, the individuals find, you know, when we're together for a long period of time, I feel like there's no space for my emotions, or, you know, it feels like I can't connect fully. Composite Mercury struggles with communications. Composite Mars, it can be very different, that somehow when the couple are together, the passion between them can feel a little bit different. What's needed for that passion can be different. And of course, we're looking at challenging aspects, maybe Mars, Saturn, Saturn, Pluto. And I totally agree with what John has said. I really am a firm believer that all aspects can be worked with. And I always say to couples when they come for you know, relationship reading, and they say, you know, am I compatible? I say, what does that mean? You know, because really compatibility is that there are enough connections to bring the two together. But if there are, you know, if somebody loves another person, really wants to be with them, there are always bridges that can be formed. It's really determined by how much energy can you put into it? Are you willing to put into it? Where are you at in your life? What else is going on in your life? So I firmly believe all relationships really can be worked with, is really what I'm saying. One of the important thing is working with challenges between the individual and composite chart. So we're talking about what are the bridges that can be created, because that's really a very important thing, because couples will often come at a time when they're going through challenges, when they're pretty desperate sometimes, feeling like there's, you know, we've tried everything, what can we do? And I think my role, certainly as a relationship astrologer, is to be able to say, look, how about trying these bridges? These are the bridges that are available. So the first thing is really to help couples with understanding the wider purpose of the composite chart. And this is also for parent, adult, child dyads. I work a lot with adult parents, or sorry, parents and adult children who are struggling together, and really to help them understand there is a wider purpose. So that often is very comforting to people to think, okay, you know, there's a reason why we need to work at this, maybe at this point. Discuss the composite chart permanent transit chart. That's what it is. As long as those two people are connected, those dynamics are going to be there, and that composite chart is going to impact the individual chart of the person. It is inevitably going to trigger unresolved issues. I'm a firm believer that relationships are really one of our richest learning ground, if not the richest learning ground. And if they are effective, they are going to trigger our childhood unresolved issues, particularly issues around attachment. So it's very helpful to have some understanding of the attachment issues, which often, of course, are connected with the moon and the lunar aspects in the individual's chart. So that's why it's back to the starting point of the individual charts. What is the individual's contribution to the composite? How do they actually enrich the relationship? What do they do that helps, enhances the relationship? Sometimes individuals don't think about that in a relationship, because we live in a culture where there's more a little bit an emphasis of what do I need? Am I getting my needs met? But sometimes to switch around and say, well, is the relationship getting what it needs from you? And what might be some ways that you might want to contribute to this? What's also going on, the transits to the individual and composite chart, very, very important to look at. And back to the bridges. What can we bridge? What are the similarities? What are the gaps? Where is there an elemental difference? What is it that's missing maybe between two charts as individuals that the composite might provide? Or what happens when the composite does not provide that? Maybe if there's an element that's missing in the individual charts, two individuals maybe with very little air, and the composite doesn't provide the air either. What happens? So how about finding some other ways for that couple to develop air in their life and in their relationship? That can be really helpful. Back to basics, the sun and moon. I always really go back to that. The sun in terms of the individuals feeling fulfilled within themselves, their sense of individuality, the whole process of individuation and separation that Jung talked about. If that isn't developed, if there is no sense of self within us, we cannot create a relationship with anybody else, because there's no one there to form the relationship. I always love the example Liz Green gave many years ago, where she described it as a donut, you know, a hole in the center if there isn't a sense of self. So the sun is very important to develop, and the moon, of course, to be connected to our emotions, but also to be able to express those emotions and be able to ask for what we need. So here is, of course, a very common couple that we're all very familiar with, and apologies if you're bored to tears with this couple, but I like using them because I think they're, especially when we're short of time, they're an easy example to look at. And first of all, looking at the synastry, and I'm going to fly through it because we don't have a lot of time, but just looking at, you can see from this that there are quite a few connections already. Now, one of the first things to look at, you know, the elements, he has low water. Megan has a little bit more balanced of a chart, but he has sun and earth, her sun is in fire. The commonality is really just the Neptune in fire. Interestingly, their ascendant descendants are switched around, which is very common with couples. He has Capricorn ascendant, she has Cancer ascendant. they have very strong Saturn-Sun aspects. In fact, they have very strong aspects between Saturn and a lot of the planets. You'll see the outside chart is his Saturn aspects, also her Venus and her Mars. Saturn is a wonderful aspect. People often complain about Saturn, but to me, it really provides that glue that helps us to stay together when the kind of, you know, initial romance is over, where there's really that sense of longevity. Obviously, if a relationship is struggling, it can be a little bit difficult with Saturn because it's hard to unstick ourselves. Now, this is just to show it the other way around, that her Mars actually lands right on his descendant, which really gives that sense of connection in terms of him representing some of that passion for her that she's looking for. So it's a lovely aspect to have. Now, if we move on to the composite on the outside as a transit chart to Harry's chart, you know, we can see immediately here that the composite chart has a sun in Earth, the same as his sun. So we can assume that it's easier for him to relate to the bigger purpose of the relationship, just because the sun is in the same element and in the same sign. So there is a sense of connection. The other thing is here, the interesting thing also is that the moon here is in air. Now, if we go back to Megan's chart, you can see that here her moon is in air. So there is more, Venus is in air. I'm staring at Venus and talking about the moon. So for Megan, this is probably quite an easy thing to relate to. And also for him, sorry, I've lost my thread completely, ignore that. They've got moon in, the composite moon is in Cancer. So it's a different moon to both of them, but it's a very soft moon. And the interesting thing is when you think about their trajectory, their life together and what has kind of brought them together and what happened once they had a child, it's as if at that point they really created this unit together, this very strong unit that actually made some pretty challenging choices, I imagine, to leave the royal family. So even though neither of them have a moon that is in water, it's still a moon that in a way helped bring them together and connected them. Now, they both have Venus in Libra, which is really what I was trying to say originally, but got wonderfully tongue-tied. So the Venus in Libra, they can both relate to, which means that there's a similarity of values. That's pretty easy. There's a commonality there. The composite chart for them both is actually very balanced, which is really helpful to have. So it kind of can balance out any little gaps that are there. Also, the moon of the composite chart is in his 7th house, which is quite a nice placement in terms of him being able to relate to that moon. And very quickly, because I know we don't have much time, just to look at the other way around, let me just put Megan in the center and the composite on the outside. You can see here a very strong connection, you know, between, there's the Venus of the composite chart, conjunct her Saturn. So again, we're talking back to the Saturn, to the kind of that sense of connection, you know, and it's interesting because Christeen talked about that with the 9th harmonic, how important those Saturn contacts are. And really they provide that glue, which is very, very helpful. Let me just see if there's anything else. Yes, the Mercury. This is something that I thought was very interesting. The composite Mercury is in the same sign and element as her own Mercury. And you probably notice that when this couple speaks, she tends to do a lot of the speaking. And it's as if she has the voice. She actually articulates for both of them, speaks on behalf of both of them, because she's really speaking on behalf of the relationship. So I'm going to leave it there for the moment. There are some other examples, but we haven't got time. I got carried away with myself with examples. And I will just open it up to questions. And just this final quote by James Hollis, that just to say that I really am a believer that it is not pathological to reenact issues from our childhood. It's actually a way to heal them. It only becomes a problem when we get very stuck and when we can't move forward in it. But otherwise, relationships really give us a wonderful arena to really heal some of those deep-seated issues. So thank you so much, and I will come out of this and come back for any questions.
Thank you, Margaret. That was fantastic. Yeah, again, there's a lot to squeeze in there with a short amount of time. So, you know, well done for managing to, you know, get us up to speed with your teachings. And the one question here is from Marlene, who says, thank you very much. She really appreciates these teachings. She's never known whether or not to give weight to composite elements. Usually giving weight to aspects and transits. So
I think, you know, I'm a firm believer that the elemental balance is always so important. You know, I think it's useful to know if there's an element missing in the relationship, because really the relationship, we can compensate. You know, couples or family members, dyads, can compensate by developing. For example, if there's a lack of air, a couple can you know, study something together, undertake something together, or a lack of earth, they can do something that has that element of earth, maybe whether, you know, on a simplistic level, just gardening. So I think it's very important not to underestimate. I would give them all, you know, equal importance, but I think to me, the elemental balance is so foundational. So I always pay attention to that. I think, you know, certainly if it's missing, I have seen it in couples. And in fact, one of the examples that if I had time to, you know, use, I would have looked at, but you can look at this yourselves with you know, Nicolas Cage and, oh goodness, I've blanked completely. Lisa Marie Presley, they are both missing an element, and that's missing in the composite as well. And it can really create some problems if there's a lack of consciousness about that.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, how interesting that some of these people, unless they look at astrology, they wouldn't even know they were missing a key element. So maybe if they're missing water, they need to go and live by the sea or something. So.
Yes, or do something creative, you know, even maybe, you know, do something, think of music, the creative arts, you know, somehow bring that element in. And you know, I think Chinese medicine is so good at describing the elements, and I know they've got 5 rather than 4, but they're very good at teaching also how to, you know, bring in those elements.
Yeah, absolutely. 5-element theory. I agree with that. Victoria has asked, where do you see the Meghan exit, question mark?
What's meant by that in terms of, do I see that in the charts, or?
Yeah, I think what she means.
I would have really been looking more at transits that were going on for both of them, and also I mean, again, if we had time, we could look at transits to the composite chart and what was going on at that time. So I think really that's more transit issues and where they're at also developmentally in their own personal cycle.
So rather than looking or predicting a departure, you prefer to look for the clashes or the collisions that may happen with up and coming transits?
Well, I would look at where they're at in terms of themselves as individuals in their life, in terms of the transits to their chart, also the transits to the composite chart. And I think we can't necessarily ever predict that somebody will make such a big move, but it's like when all the forces come together, you know, it's like when the stars collide, basically. And I think when somebody doesn't have many options, and in their position, it's not like an ordinary couple that can just, you know, decide they're going to emigrate to Canada or the States. I mean, it kind of really, it gets expressed in such a mega way. I think it's almost like to express who they are and to express themselves as a couple, it's almost like they have no choice, you know, but to do something so drastic. But I would certainly, you know, at the time I was looking at their transits and thinking that's interesting. But like a lot of things, you know, as astrologers, it's easy to look back on things afterwards and pinpoint the transits. I mean, I don't do predictive work, so I don't really look for, you know, into the future, but I'm always very interested to look at, okay, what was the synchronicity of the transits at the time of such a big decision?
Yeah, this is the joy of having hindsight and being able to look back, like you say, as a way of understanding the present.
Well, I think also because some transits are so big that I think, even though I really think transits are internal developments within each of us, sometimes they are so big and so important that we can't contain them within, and so they have to be expressed externally. And I think that's when things happen. And you know, when that's going on for two people at the age they're at, within the circumstances they're in, I think it's not surprising that something big happened. And also they're carrying a lot for their family. There is certainly their ancestry. They're, you know, representing a lot, and for the collective.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that kind of leads on to the next question. Melia has asked, would you say that transits also give the social context, or give a social context?
That's a really difficult one. I don't think so. I think, remember, you know, we're looking at transits to the individual chart. We're looking on, because I'm a psychological astrologer, I look at them more in terms of the psyche of the individual as to what's going on, rather than the context they're in. And remember that a chart of, you know, Meghan Markle's chart, somebody was born at that same time in another part of the world where there were very different circumstances. So the impact of the transits on that person now are going to be very different probably than with Meghan. But on the level of the psyche, they're the same transits, but how they get expressed are very different. And I don't believe a chart can show that.
Yeah, Priscilla says she believes that their composite chart, maybe you can confirm this, has a Sun square Uranus. So they will always do things their own individual way. I can't remember whether I saw that, but do they have Sun square Uranus on their?
You know, I really can't remember, and I haven't got it in front of me. I can certainly go back a second and share the screen. Bear with me. Hang on. Well, sorry, it's just coming up now. Let's go back. Where are we? Okay, the inner wheel, where are we? I should know this, but I can't. Yes, there we go. So yeah, I mean, I would certainly say, yes, absolutely, spot on. But, you know, Sun Uranus can be expressed in so many different ways, you know, and I think that's the thing to always remember, that that really, you know, Sun square Uranus is that they're ahead of their time in a way. And I would say that the relationship has a purpose for the collective, for the evolution of the collective. You know, it's very connected with going forward, with moving forward. And so it's not surprising that they would challenge collective beliefs, collective ways of being in the world. It's a very idealistic Sun purpose, you know, it's very much about moving forward. So, but again, it would depend on the circumstances. I mean, they could be in the middle of a situation where there's, you know, a war going on, and they wouldn't be able to do it in the same ways they're doing it in their current life.
Absolutely. There's certainly a key relationship for us all to be looking at during this time, just because of their presence in the world. But it's fascinating to go a little bit deeper into their synastry. So thank you so much, Margaret. That's fantastic. We've crammed quite a lot in there, actually. I think you managed to stretch time in your slot there. So thank you ever so much, and for answering all the questions. So
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You are welcome. And hopefully, if any anyone has any more questions for Margaret or would like to get in touch with her, her details are up there on the screen, or you can watch the playback if you need to grab those again. Okay, so last but not least, we are moving on to Mr. Roy Gillett, who has been waiting and enjoying, hopefully, the webinar up to date. So Roy is going to be speaking about reconciling harmonious and stress aspects. So smooth flowing aspects can make life too easy, even dangerously so. By way of contrast, working with squares and oppositions can strengthen and help us grow. Roy will illustrate this with example charts of people and situations from consultation and mundane astrology. So Roy is the president of the Astrological Association. Since 1976, has advised thousands of clients and the mundane world on transformation through astrology. Books are Astrology and Compassion, The Convenient Truth, Economy, Ecology and Kindness, and The Secret Language of Astrology, and Reversing the Race to Global Destruction. So we're very much looking forward to this final presentation of the day. So without further ado, over to you, Roy.
Thank you. I know how we go in here. I'm seeing you still, but not myself. How did that happen? Do you want me to just share my screen straight away? Yeah. Here we go. Okay, so we're starting off now. This is a little bit, I'm quite well known as a mundane astrologer, as many of you will know, and there's an element of mundane creeping into what I'm going to present. But the main theme of this is the relationship between, if I can get this working, there we go, reconciling harmonious and stress aspects, and what Tracie just read, because I feel it's very important to see, as I think several people have hinted already in this sessions, that it's not, easy aspects are not good and stress aspects are not bad. All aspects are things to understand and use. And the more we use them in a selfless and beneficial way to the whole universal flow, the greater achievements we can have, and also the greater happiness, not only for us, but other people. And that's the philosophy behind all the work I do, whether it's with personal relationships or in my mundane work. So I want to just start off, first of all, by very simple stuff, which a lot of you will see is pretty obvious, but I think it's important just to recap. Imagine you're sitting around a table. It's a round table, and there's a person sitting in each of the points of this grand trine. And generally, if you do that, you practice it sometime, you'll see that it's very easy to get on with everybody because there's enough accommodation, there's no confrontation. And even the person who's in the midway point on the sextile between each of the trine lines is a kind of a supporter to something that you're willing to accommodate. So the general feeling is one of harmony, it's easy flow. And of course, these are called the triplicities, and they're in each of the elements. Now, if you look at the fire element, it's very easy flowing action. The idea of a great friendship between Leo and Aries, and this great freedom to burst into situations, this energetic aspiration, the great optimism of Sagittarius, the Leo, general generosity and pride and good fun and party. And that's a very positive way of looking at it, but it also can be very overactive, very immature, very precipitous, and very dangerous. Some of the worst aspects can happen when you get violence coming in situations. Riding a motorcycle with Mars in Sagittarius in the first house can be very dangerous and can lead to some pretty unpleasant situations. Again, when we look at the Earth signs, Earth is about materiality, it's about responsibility, it's about, from the Virgo point of view, of course, absolute perfect manifestation. It's about responsibility of structure and organization. It's very, very about beauty, about the creation of beauty out of things. It's about valuing things in their real substantial level. And yet it can also be about possessiveness, greediness, over-authoritarian, over-anxious, critical negativity. When we look at air, it can be about quick, intelligent understanding, accommodation, friendly banter and fun and conversation and very advanced intellectual understanding and universal knowledge and wisdom. It can also be about neurosis, anxiety, arguing, bitterness. And so again with water, it's very much to do with emotional empathy. Something you can't explain, something you know just by the intimacy of your connection. The way John was explaining in his talk, that kind of intimacy of the moon. It can be very fruitful and very reassuring, very wonderful, but it can also be about attachment. And that attachment can come about vulnerability, and out of that vulnerability can come resentment, and out of that resentment can come a kind of spitefulness. So, you know, it's a question of our own ability to let go of our ego attachments and short-sightedness that determines how this will express itself. So now I want to look at another table, and this time it's the same table, but it's laid out in 4 positions of the Grand Cross, of the square. And here you can see that conflict is almost immediately there. You've got an opposition, so you're confronted with that someone's facing up to you. It's a bit more edgy to your left or your right because you know, you're not quite sure if you can see that person. When they're trying, you can see them. They're all accommodating. We're all sitting together with a square. There's a kind of edginess on the awkwardness of it, and then there's that people ganging up on you on the semi-square, and then there's the sesquiquadrate, which is like a semi-square, but the a further round aspect, and that awkward strain of the quincunx, the 150-degree aspect. So this is an awkward relationship. This is the stress, and what it comes to is, of course, that you get, these are the aspects that indicate stress on the chart, and these are the quadruplicities, and we have to master 3 of them. The first one is the cardinal signs, which is the sign of responsibility to get things moving. The Aries push, the Cancer sensitivity that gets things moving, the Libran accommodation that gets people in the right sort of position to be comfortable, and of course the Capricorn, which is the master, the sort of managing director of the universe. These are the positive ways of cardinal energy. But if you push too hard, if you worry too much, if you rush into things without really thinking it through, if you are over sort of adjusting in, I mean, I hope you can trace the sign I'm talking about when I say this. If you're over accommodating, sit on the fence too much, then you don't really get things moving, or you get things unbalanced, or people feel they're being pushed around. And then you get the quadruplicity of fixed energy, which is to do with keeping things in a stable and sensible way. And this is very, very good for practicality, for when you want to command a situation so you can organize people, when you can get your own intense feelings really focused so they can be effective in their way they're acting, or when you have knowledge and want to sort of universally describe the knowledge. But the trouble with that is that you can become too inflexible and prevent things happening. And the last one, of course, is the mutability, where you are very flexible and are very easygoing. And but the Grand Cross of mutability can mean you're too easygoing, you're too emotionally upset, you're too a sort of easygoing in what you'll let happen and won't let happen. You're too, if you like, too many ideas flashing around all over the place. You're never really getting anywhere, and there's too much emotion to really organize things, too much action going on. So it's important to see these various aspects are affecting relationships. Now, if we were in a class here, this is where we get the fun bit, having explained the serious theory behind my thinking and asking people to think about this when they're looking at charts on an individual basis. We'd start interacting and discussing this chart. And this is a fascinating chart. I don't know if you've seen it before. I've only shown you one part of it for the moment. You'll see why in a minute. But if you look at it, it'd say this to the class, what do you think of this lovely grand trine in fire signs? The Sun, Mercury is in a trine to Mars, and in another trine to Chiron and the part of fortune, if you want to consider it. So that's a lovely fire grand trine. And then we've got an air grand trine. Well, it's a really awkward one, this, because it's really just moving out of Earth into air. It's just that Neptune's about to go into Libra, Saturn, Uranus are about to go into Gemini and so on. But it is this cusp, it's been building up through Earth and it's just come into air. So really it's more of an Earth grand trine as well. So you've got this wonderful material recession, easy flowing fire. And what did it produce? It's the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And you can see that, all right, there's a Grand Cross as well, and the Grand Cross immutable signs between the nodal axis and the Sun and Jupiter. And this obviously does bring pressure down on it. But if you do a global search, if you do a web search for Pearl Harbor attack pictures, you'll see the most unbelievable destruction caused by the most harmonious fire energy. It's pretty obvious, really, of course. I mean, obviously, if you've got too much fire, you burn. And obviously, the combination of the pressure of the time, it was really very, very strong. But this energy didn't need to be used this way. It was the egocentric attachment of the Japanese authorities in those days that believed in the superiority of the tradition of an ancient Japanese view of reality, which is really no longer with us in quite the same way. The transformation of the Japanese nation after the war is unbelievable. But at the time, there was this incredible obsession with the self and the identity of the nation and its destiny, that the grand trines were used to build an amazing attack force and to cause absolute destruction on a nation, another nation. Now, of course, this didn't, in the end, lead to an advantage. It seemed as if this was a wonderful possibility. You know, if you look at the, if you look at just the trines, it seemed as if we'd wonderful, successful attack. Of course, what it did was triggered the American nation, which was asleep and reluctant to join the war, into arming and coming back. And it destroyed the whole view of reality that those leaders of Japan at the time had. So it worked completely against them in the long run, because they were using the knowledge selfishly rather than selflessly. Now, it's interesting to mention this at the moment, because I don't know if you noticed that the only time that Mars was retrograding through Aries since way back last century was just in the months leading up to Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor happened on the 7th of December. It's almost off the point, but it's so fascinating. And it went direct on the 9th of November. You may be beginning to see why I'm showing you this. And then it moved into Taurus on the 11th of January, 1942. Of course, the Mars retrograde period we're going through at the moment started on the 28th of June. Conjuncted Aries on the 28th of June, compare 1st July. It went into retrograde on the 9th of September, say 6th of September. It goes direct for us now on the 14th until the 9th, and it goes into Taurus on the 6th of January. This is the first time since then, and look at what's happening to the American nation. Maybe this is a subject for another talk. Right, let's get down to some personal stuff. And I'm very grateful to Christeen for her preparatory work for this one. I didn't know she was going to do it. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Again, if I had a class in front of me, I would invite them to say, do you think it's a good time to get married? Is this a good marriage chart? Here we got a grand cross, a massive grand cross between the nodal axis and Moon and Saturn, Pluto, Mars. I mean, really, you could take all of those three planets. So obviously Saturn, Mars is the strong emphasis on it, particularly Saturn. This is really an incredible fixed grand cross tremendous responsibility, arduous, hard, difficult to accept. How on earth would you want to take on a marriage like that? And it is the chart that Christeen didn't show you, which is the actual marriage chart for Princess Elizabeth and Philip Mountbatten, of course, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. And you can see that on top of the Grand Cross, we see the Venus trine Pluto, and to a certain extent the Mars. Yeah, Venus is applying to trine Mars, isn't it? So it's a harmonious male-female marriage, and Christeen will show you some of the lovely connections between the couple that enabled them to take on such a challenging situation. And also the willingness to take in the responsibility. The Venus is applying. I always feel that applying aspects are really important. And the square you see is taking the responsibility, as I've just put it up here. And then it's not just the trine, but the positive use of the T-square. You see, there is a trine here between the Venus and the Mars Saturn, but there's also another trine between the Moon and Uranus. So this is, and this is a very strong trine. This is just applying 3 degrees shy. But it's not just the trine, it's the way they use the T-square that's made this amazing marriage such a success. They have in fact been married for 73 years. Well, they will be. 20th of November, they celebrate their 73rd wedding anniversary. It's pretty remarkable. Compare that to the wedding of Charles and Di. Here we have a very famous public event with the all that Cancer energy, the Mars coming up to the top. Those who are old enough will remember that Britain was going through incredible traumas through the earlier part of 1981, and it was the marriage of Charles and Di that diverted attention to, rather like Meghan and Harry recently, it diverted attention away from aggression into a kind of integration, and it was very important. It captured people's imagination. It seemed like a wonderful experience. It was all very positive. You'll notice that there's a Cancer Leo stellium in the 10th house, the most hopeful, positive, very public event. A Libra stellium rising in the 1st house. It's time to serve, as I said, to avert a massive social breakdown in the UK by detracting attention from social unrest. At the time I was writing about this and thinking, well, this is a wonderful example of how you can use the symbolism of a famous couple to transform, to heal the world. And I mean, obviously I was laying a very sort of optimistic trip on the things as the relationship turned out. Again, we're going to look at the harmonious grand trines that both of these people have. You have a grand trine in Earth between in Charles's chart. Well, the Jupiter isn't quite in Capricorn, but it's only 7 minutes shy, and it's moving that direction. But it's that Moon-Saturn's trine, and of course the Moon is exactly conjunct his mother, the Queen's son. He gets all his inheritance from her. You know, he does inherit the throne of Britain from her. And so he is a very wealthy, well-positioned man who has everything at his disposal. So what's he going to do with it? Now, I mean, Prince Charles, in fact, has done a lot of charitable work. He formed the Prince's Trust. He's done lots of good things. But at the same time, he's still in this very special position. Diana, Princess Diana, has Neptune in Scorpio, in a trine to from Sun and Mercury, and grand trine down to Chiron in Pisces. Now, this is obviously very emotional and very vulnerable. I mean, you could look at the rest of her chart, which the 8th house is about vulnerability. And we won't, again, like with everyone else, have time to really do the proper job on this. I want to just bring out the tension and opportunity and how it's used. This is the theme of this talk. But you can see that trine is very emotional. Now, when you put the rest of the planets on top, you can see the trauma that both of them were born to face and to reconcile. With Charles, it's the Moon-Mercury opposition across the nodal axis, which has made him be a figure of original, almost new age reform, mocked generally by the mainstream media. And of course, the Jupiter-Uranus as well. And, you know, being in a position of having to find the right bride after all the traumas of the Duke of Windsor and Princess Margaret earlier on, he didn't quite recover. Harry was allowed to marry who he wanted to, but Charles never could. And this led to an ongoing problem with his relationship. With Diana, you see this incredible savage second, eighth house energy. It was a very, very difficult time for both of them. They both needed a lot more support and advice, but in fact, they found themselves, because they were not able to master the and take full advantage of the positivity, the negativity turned them against each other. And you can see to a certain extent why it is when you look at the fact that there was tremendous focus on water energy, and when water falls out, it becomes very vicious. And so the overview, I'm just moving that picture around, that's it. Too much water, which leads to emotional upset. The roles are focused on public service, but was it to serve or for self-affirmation? Both of them did a lot of charitable work, but to what extent were they doing the charitable work for themselves or for, you know, to aggrandizate themselves? That was always the issue. And so, you know, yeah, it was just that good. And opposition's hand in the stress between self and service. So, just having a look, there we go. I wanted to show you this aspect pattern between the synastry. You can, it looks ever so cluttered, but in fact, if you look at the overall picture, if you step back, you can see the tension, you see the pressure of the Grand Cross. You can see the strong trine energy as well. And this inability, the whole relationship, the whole public nature of the relationship is very clearly shown in the tension between these two people's charts. And it's all to do with the reconciliation of the Grand Cross and the Grand Trine. Too much focus on the Taurian moon, in as far as Charles is concerned, conjuncts his mother's son, indicates a crisis for the royal family. The fixed Grand Cross indicates an inability to let go, and the strong trine shows the emotional intensity that I was talking about and public interest in those emotional problems, the almost sort of perverse interest of the media in this relationship and it breaking up was almost cruel and unnecessary, but is shown very clearly in those aspects. Ideally, was the synastry considered before the marriage? Because all this could have been anticipated and avoided if it had been. So I just want to look a little bit at bringing it up to date, and I want to make a contrast, an absolute contrast, which I'm really excited about, and that is to look at the harmonious energy on Donald Trump's chart between the Libran Jupiter and the strong Gemini energy, as well as the Moon-Mars trine, which makes him very forthright and dynamic. I mean, we don't need to talk about this man's behavior, really. You see it in public, but look at the chart that lies behind it. And then if we put the rest of the chart, you see this massive opposition on the nodal axis. He was born on a full moon, Gemini, Sagittarius full moon, with this intense ability to communicate because of the Gemini and the Jupiter in Libra trine in it. And the Mars in Leo rising, virtually, it's just in the 12th house, but it's right on close to the ascendant. And that is being trined by the moon in Sagittarius. So you get the actual characteristics. You can see even the attachment to the Cancer energy is just a way that he feels it's so much, it's him, it's his people, his, you know, this identity, this attachment to service of the way he sees it. And yet all this energy is so clearly explained in the chart. And of course we see that because he is so caught up with this turbulent energy, a lot of people would argue that his efficiency in handling the coronavirus in America has not been effective. Contrast that with the Jacinda Ardern.
Just letting you know, Roy, we're coming up to like 4 minutes to 7 if you want to take some questions as well.
I need to finish this point, if I may.
Yes.
I'll use my question time. I mean, you know, it's nearly there, and this is really important. This is the climax of it. So the Jacinda Ardern is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and they managed to get on top of the virus immediately and master it. She was a woman who had, she gave birth as Prime Minister. She took on the attack of Islamic attack, and she, of course, has eradicated, it seems. There was a gathering of 46,000 people in a rugby stadium for a match last weekend that could never, without any masks or any protection at all. New Zealand has solved the problem so far. And so the comparison is that she had this incredible ability to take on just about every bit of aspect you can imagine. And because I have to rush and finish it, I can't go into the details, but I do encourage you to have a look at this chart, her chart, and see how she has mastered it and become the most difficult chart, mastered it. Also have a look at the presidential inauguration for the 20th of January 2021, because that has some amazing challenges in it. And there will be a lot to, this is the most momentous time in American history, and it's all about learning to handle and be selfless in the way you take the positive and negative planets. Okay, I'll stop at that point just to show you, if you want to make contact. If you want to find out more about the idealism that lies behind my thinking, just type the links in blue. Sorry, I took a bit more time. There we go.
No, Roy, that was absolutely fascinating. I wish we could have a bit more time so we can hear the rest, you know, a bit more in-depth information on the last.
What people can do is, if they are interested in the last two slides, which we didn't have time to really explain fully, they can stop the slides when they hear the recording coming back and look at them and see what I was getting at from that point of view.
Yeah, but still, I know there was more there for you to dive into. But somebody asked something very interesting. Have you analysed Vice Presidential Kamala Harris's chart and compared it to the chart of the attack on Pearl Harbor?
No, but I'm going to, now you've answered it. What I do know is that her nodal axis is conjunct to Donald Trump's, and on election day, the transiting nodal axis is conjunct within 1 degree of that point, that north node position they both share. With Kamala, it's on the first house, and we've got Trump, of course, it's up the top near the top of the chart. The nodal axis, if you take the true node, moves backwards and forwards through the weeks and a couple of months immediately after the election. When you get to the actual inauguration chart, which I've just shown you, it's still pretty close to the position that they both share. But after that, it moves on quite substantially. This is the true node, because it goes backwards and forwards, the true node, as you probably know. What that means, I'm not sure, but it's a very interesting link between the two people. And of course, he was only speaking yesterday. She's never going to become president. You know, he was very negative about Kamala Harris yesterday, even mispronounced her name deliberately.
Well, when you've done a chart interpretation, do let us know. I'm sure we'll be
yeah, I'd like to compare it. I invite everybody to do so. Well, they've got the details here on my talk, so they can look at it. But I mean, yeah. the crucial thing I want to really impress on this is, what I'm trying to say with this is that astrology is not about good and bad aspects, easy or difficult flows. It's about understanding them, mastering them selflessly. The more selfless we are in the way we handle our energy, like the Queen and Prince Philip, or like the Lady Ardern in New Zealand, the more wonderful things we can do for the world. And the more we're self-absorbed with our own benefits and problems, the worse we create problems for the world. And I think that's a very important thing to remember in relationships, because in personal relationships, people spend a lot of time arguing about obligations and responsibilities and accusations and resentments for what you've done and I've done. And particularly, there is this detail in relationships where transits and progressions bring people together, but they also move on, and therefore they leave people apart. And if there isn't true love, then you're constantly trying to relive something that won't happen again because it's moved on. And so it's so important to get beyond attachment if you're going to have good relationships. This is really what I wanted to communicate today.
Great point. Thank you, Roy. That's an amazing, yeah, absolutely. Hear to that. And just, someone said something very interesting. Do you take into consideration that Jupiter was stationing direct on the day of Donald Trump's birth, and that there was also an eclipse on that day as well?
Yeah, there was an eclipse. Yeah, like lunar eclipse. Obviously, I mean, but what the lunar eclipse does is just makes this incredible megaphone capacity that he has. You know, this incredible ability to communicate. I mean, I've got Sag rising with the moon in Gemini in the 7th house. So I've got quite a strong ability to articulate, but I mean, when you've got a Sagittarius Gemini full moon eclipsed and Mars virtually rising and all that Libra energy trying to it, you see, you can get very upset with Donald Trump, but he is what he is, and that's his chart. And what's he going to do with it? You know, he can be very charming, very affectionate, very accommodating, but it doesn't last, or many people feel it doesn't last, you know, because he hasn't let go of himself. And it's very difficult to do it with a chart like that in any case. It's a real challenge in this lifetime for him to be born with a chart like that, where he can succeed so much, but at the same time, sort of not have to question himself as much as he probably needs to from time to time.
Yeah, thank you. And then one last question, because we've just gone a bit over here and I want to be aware of people's time, but Trudy was asking about the, would a Grand Cross or Grand Trine apply to the AC as well and MC?
Yeah, I always think with these questions, should I include this point and that point or some the other point, is you can include the point to the extent that it's relevant. Obviously, if you've got a grand trine on your ascendant or midheaven, on your ascendant, you're going to be able to be harmonious in the way you project whatever the planets are. And again, with the midheaven, you're going to be more recognized. Similarly, if it's a cross, then the burden of responsibility is more clearly upon you if it's on the midheaven or the ascendant, you know. So yes, I would include it. Everything is relevant in astrology, but only in its own level for what it is. You know, if you interpret it for what it is, then it's relevant. I mean, even some of the more obscure points that people bring in, I mean, the aspects I haven't spoken about, they're all relevant in terms of what they are, but particularly the angles. If you want to know this for sure, use solar fire or a similar thing to check the movement of the day through when planets cross the midheaven or the ascendant, and you'll see all sorts of things triggering up in certain parts of the world as certain things happen. You can do this with the stock market. It's really interesting to follow the angles through the day, and that helps to justify the question that Trudy asked.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Roy. We've had more questions, but they'll just have to wait for another time, because I just want to say huge thanks to everyone for all their questions, people who've been watching, and obviously our wonderful astrologists today. Thank you, Christeen, for your wonderful presentation, and to John and Margaret as well, and of course you, Roy. So if anybody wants to contact any, you know, just look back on the recordings, all the contact details were there. I just want to say, yeah, thank you all. We've run out of time. I'm sure we could have gone on for another 2 hours easily, but maybe we'll do another one of these another time. So anyone would like to say anything at the end?
Just thank you so much for having us here, Tracie. It's been a lovely, lovely afternoon. Thank you.
You are
Yes.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Tracie. Thank you for bringing it all together.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure to, on this rainy day, to hear all of you and to, you know, share your wonderful insights. So thank you. Okay, over to you, Jeff.
Yes, Tracie, thank you for everything you do for OPA as OPA's UK satellite. And thank you, Margaret, Christine, Roy, and John, who has left us. But a really great satellite event. And we will for sure have more of these. So stay tuned. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, all of you, for sharing. And I will do my best to get the recording out by tomorrow, United States time. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Tracie.
Okay, no problem. Bye, everyone. Have a great
Bye,
rest of the day.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.